All right, everybody. So, for those of you guys that don't know, one of my personal interests that I like to, look at videos about and watch content on off stream is medieval weaponry and knight stuff. I like watching videos about swords and knights and medieval times and stuff. And my favorite YouTuber that does that type of content these days is Scaligrim. Pretty base dude, pretty cool dude. But the biggest YouTuber in that entire community is a guy named Shadiversity, who also happens to be a massive chud, just a massive conservative, massive anti-woke right-winger dude. He goes on a lot of the anti-woke podcasts to bitch about, like, how media is getting woke and it's pandering to, like, brown people and minorities and stuff. And he gets really upset about it and impassioned in his rants as well. And I was sent this just the other day and thought it'd be fantastic to go over, because apparently Shadiversity went onto Sargon of Akkad's new podcast, The Lotus Eaters, to quote-unquote complain about woke cartoons. It caught my eye. Honestly, I have no more lead-in to give. Let's give it a look. Not Hassan. I don't know why I keep thinking, like, it's because I was just ranting about Hassan a minute ago. This, like, area of chud content, that original sphere of anti-SJW skeptic YouTubers from Sargon's era of popularity, 2014 Gamergate era, have really fallen off as of late. So I'm really, Ass Eaters podcast. So I'm really excited to see what's the state of their content these days, right? Like, the last thing I saw from Sargon was his awful food takes.
Hi folks, I've got the absolute pleasure of being joined by Shad from the YouTube channel Shadiversity.
Oh my god,
if you don't know him, go look him up because he does great work. He talks about castles and medieval war a lot, which is definitely up my alley. But he also is concerned about, well, the modern world and the state of families, which is something we're going to talk about, because you're a very successful father yourself, aren't you?
Thank you, father of 5.
That's amazing. I'm 4.
Yeah.
So my wife's like, no, that's enough. We're not having any more. And to be honest with you, I'm fine with that.
Fucking breeders,
that was kind of our intent. But interestingly enough, my wife and I, going into parenting, we actually were like, we wanted as many as we could manage. Like we would have been happy 12 and more, right? Like we genuinely love kids more than I can really express. But we also understood that we have to take it one at a time, see what we can manage, and we could see that, okay, I think we have hit our limit at 5, even though there is that side of us that, gosh, we would love more. But five is brilliant.
My wife, every single day, she says something like, I'd like another baby. And it's like, okay, we have a current baby at the moment. She's 6 months old. And, we've got more than enough to handle. 4 is enough. So
remember, guys, if you ever feel like you've got no potential love life, remember these guys are like married and have several children. Like, I promise you, women's standards are in hell, okay? Like, the existence of straight women is an anomaly, all right? Women's standards are literally in hell.
No more for us, thank God.
But you mind if I jump on something that you mentioned? So I started doing YouTube swords and everything, castles, history, knighthood, all that stuff. Always been deeply, deeply interested in cultural events, as well as the way the culture manifests. More so probably the way the culture manifests in terms of media, because that had such a astounding impact on me growing up. The heroes that I was engrossed in, the stories, the mythology, and it literally made me a better person. I grew up as a kid wanting to be a superhero, and that was an intent. That was an active quest of mine as a kid.
Okay,
and
we're already getting
cringe. Conversation with other friends, like, how can we get superpowers? Let's really discuss this. And I went through like the list, like,
I don't think gamma radiation.
No, I don't want to risk getting bitten by a spider, and I don't think it's
not in Australia anyway.
Yeah, well, right.
Every time I get bitten by a spider, I test if I can climb walls. I think this is completely reasonable. Sometimes you get bitten by a spider and it's like, all right, gotta check. And you do the scene from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie where he like climbs up the brick wall and nothing happens. You're like, next time. I can relate there.
And genie bottles were really too hard to find. I didn't know it, but I came up with this brilliant plan. There was epiphany as a kid. It's like, oh my gosh, I could ask Santa for magical powers. He has magical powers.
Yeah,
he could grant them to me. Yeah. And so literally,
okay, this is getting. What are we talking about?
I did that. I actually asked Santa Claus for magical powers, and I eventually got a note back from Santa one Christmas stating that he couldn't give them to me yet, but he would give them to me in the future. And I was like, yes! But it was because of the impact of what I was engrossed in. And there was some great.
Can you imagine what his reaction was to... Spoiler alert. Finding out Santa Claus isn't real. Dude. Could you imagine what his reaction was as a kid to finding that out? And then realizing he's not going to get superpowers one day? What the fuck, Zan? Don't say that. I'm sorry. Have I spoiled it? I hope none of you guys are parents watching with kids in the room, because you guys are... Listen, if that happened, then listen to any kids watching right now, alright? Know that your parents told you Santa exists and pretended to be Santa buying you presents because they love you and wanted you to have fun. And you got a ton of presents, and the world got to be magical through your childhood. You'll appreciate it. You'll appreciate it one day. My 10-year-old just figured it out on his own finally, blew his mind. I found out when I was 10 too, and my grandma told me. I was pretty suspect for about like 4 years, like, I'm pretty sure Santa's not real, but I'm just gonna not question it because I like getting the presents. And then one day when I was 10, I was just in the car with my grandma after getting, like, on Christmas Day, like, Grandma, it's just you and me in here, and you're cool. Tell me, is Santa real? And she was like, no. And I was like, son of a bitch. Yeah, my grandma was my best friend. Like, unironically, she was my best friend.
Just cartoons and role models that I really identified with. Superman was a big one, Spider-Man, and of course Robin Hood, and all those things. And so that's actually what was my goal in life, to be a writer, to try and make stories that could have these same kind of positive things. And my quest was to be an author before a YouTuber. Right. YouTubing I started as, well, I wanted to create misinformation. It was just a hobby, something I enjoyed, but also potentially build a fan base to launch my writing career. But it certainly became...
Okay, let's...
launch and doing a graphic novel now, and...
been thinking in the past few years just about the media that I consumed when I was young. And I went back and watched...
So this is where they're going to complain about the cartoons of nowadays, I suppose. Dude, modern day cartoons are better than ever. Like, kids media, there's obviously, like, the unironic drivel, like what Daily Wire's putting out, that's just meant to, like, keep kids glued to the TV with flash animation. But then you've got stuff that, like, really started to come to its own in the 2010s, and that's all ages animation, where it's appropriate for, like, older kids and, like, young teens for sure, but it's definitely got themes that can be appreciated by any audience. Adventure Time was, like, the biggest to do this, and, like, one of the first to do this more. I think actually Avatar: The Last Airbender would have been the first, but like, I mean, you meet people in their 30s and 40s who are like, Avatar: The Last Airbender, that shit goes hard. And people who are kids that like it, right? I remember having very fleeting memories of watching a couple episodes as a kid, but I haven't seen it old enough to know anything about it other than he control elements, and he ride on big, fluffy, flying creature, and the Fire Nation attacked. That happened. Yeah, Teen Titans 2 did that, yeah. But I think it really started to come to its own with Adventure Time. That was the point where you, like, if you went into a college, like, dorm in 2011, you would just see Adventure Time shit everywhere. Everyone would be watching Adventure Time and getting stoned or, like, tripping balls on acid. Like, Adventure Time had its, like, adult audience of stoners, and the surprisingly much smaller audience of kids that watched it, who are arguably the target audience, because, of course, it could be appreciated by such a wide audience. And that's something that I don't think most older cartoons offer. Like, if you go back and watch, like, cartoons from this guy's era, I'm sure there's some enjoyment you would be able to derive from them as an adult, but you're going to enjoy them a lot more if it's what you grew up on, because a lot of it's nostalgia. Modern day animation in the realm of, like, Steven Universe, Adventure Time, regular show, you know, Infinity Train I've heard is really good. Owl House I've heard is really good. Like, these are shows that are actually, like, serialized to an extent. Or sorry, not serialized. They have an episodic format to an extent. They, like, try to tell a broader story while also doing character development teaching like lessons that literally anyone of any age can like learn from and appreciate. And it's like able to do that while also retaining the ability to be appreciated by younger people. I don't know. I feel like that's always been a thing in kids animation to an extent, but it has been much more leaned into now, particularly with modern sensibilities becoming less focused on having to protect children from topics that are too mature being like, approached them, right? Then if you go back far enough, it gets even more like mature though, because like there was a point where you had like outright swearing in kids' cartoons, and then it got really PC because of conservatism, ironically enough, because they didn't want like anything inappropriate in their kids' stuff. And then now as society gets more liberal, things start to move back towards a little bit more of a looser leash on the type of media that kids are allowed to consume.
It's a bunch of it. Like just literally kids' cartoons from like the 80s and 90s, right? And one of the things I just found remarkable is how unperverse it was, right? How
Ren and Stimpy is goated.
Actually wholesome.
Yeah.
Like people find like things like He-Man and Transformers.
You know when something's so funny that you laugh uncontrollably and painfully for a long period of time? Watching an old VHS tape of Ren and Stimpy when I was like 8, with the episode with the sentient fart, was the one that did that. That was my first time ever laughing so hard I couldn't control it and it hurt. And I was almost scared while I was laughing because I didn't know if it was ever going to stop. I didn't know if the laughing would ever stop because I'd never laughed so hard in my life. Ren and Stimpy is goated. Invader Zim as well. Invader Zim is very f***ing goated.
Comical now, but actually, if you go back and watch them, they're good messages.
Really good.
The heroes always do the right thing.
Yes, and He-Man often ended with a positive message.
An actual like moral.
Notice here how the idea is that you can't allow children to be exposed to anything too complex because then it'll confuse them. That's a big part of why modern day... Notice how Adventure Time has, like, hidden lore? Like, you have to actually theory craft a little bit to understand what's happening in Adventure Time. They expect, an audience of teenagers and kids to look at backgrounds and use context clues to figure out character backstory and world lore in Adventure Time. Very little of it is just outright spoon-fed to you. They didn't outright admit the show takes place in a post-nuclear war-torn world 1,000 years later until season 3. That's when they first outright explicitly say it. But the hints are all there since the first episode. Yeah, I don't know. I think that the idea that kids can handle complex messaging, like for example, Finn is the main protagonist and the hero of Adventure Time. He is like the embodiment, the human personification of good. Fundamentally, he is the human personification of the concept of good. He is a true hero. And yet, he is not a Mary Sue who always does the right thing. He is flawed. For example, one of the earliest examples of this, like in the early show, is his tendency to resort to violence. He's like a traditional, old school hero, right? He's like Link, right? He sees a bad guy, he beats them up or kills them and saves the innocent people. But sometimes resorting to violence the way he does has bad outcomes, and he has to learn that lesson that sometimes he has to be diplomatic, and he needs to, de-escalate instead of just running in like a immature child and, killing all the bad guys, right? And so that's a very early lesson that they teach, that our hero does bad things and he is flawed, but through that the character learns lessons and develops and so forth. But there are entire seasons where our hero is flawed. Who remembers the Fincel arc in Adventure Time, where for an entire season, Finn is an incel, little snivelly little piece of shit when it comes to women. He's just the worst when it comes to women for an entire season because he's 15 or whatever, and he has an entire season and a half arc where he has to mature into seeing women as people and respecting them. So, and they make it so they explain this in a way where he gets cursed with magical eyes that turns people into how he sees them. And the woman that he once saw, he once objectified as an attainable goal he wants to get, that he is owed, that he needs to earn, right? That he is entitled to. We see that he now sees her as a bro. A lot of people interpret it as Finn being gay, but it's very obvious if you look at the implication. Finn is matured into seeing her as a friend, as like effectively as anybody else, as just one of the guys, as just a bro, as a friend, someone that he can platonically be friends with because he's matured to that point. And for entire seasons, Finn is fundamentally flawed in this way, and the show is all about him, by the end of it, becoming relatively like an ideal hero. But even by the end, even after the end, we see in Fiona and Cake, he's got plenty of problems still. Modern day kids media isn't afraid to get complicated and gritty and gray with some of the messaging and the portrayals of people who are meant to be the hero. We're willing to have flawed heroes. The concept of that in kids media especially is something people like this are opposed to. They see that as woke. So if you like the idea of complex heroes in your media, then I guess you're woke. And people like this want to destroy that in media because that's the evil woke takeover of video games and cartoons, and it's turning kids woke and it's propaganda. Like, can you see how completely like miserable a world run by these people artistically would be?
Lecture.
Yes.
A conservative, often moral lecture. I mean, there was one episode of He-Man where the characters are lecturing you about the Magna Carta and the importance of Magna Carta. Yeah. And I was just like, yes. You know, if I were my dad, I'd want my son watching that. And I, as the father to my sons, I would be more than happy for them to watch that.
Yeah. Just on He-Man's, like there was an episode where He-Man lost his sword and he had to confront the bad guy without his powers. Right. And the message at the end was, you know,
guys, you can't make this shit up. I want you to think of all the kink at Pride discourse right now, okay? Recall all of the kink at Pride discourse. This is He-Man. You can't make this shit up. You literally cannot make this shit up. It's all hypocrisy. If there was a guy standing at a Pride parade like this and there was a kid in the audience and they were able to be caught in the same frame as a photo, it would be used by conservative propagandists for decades to come. But here they are reminiscing about how this is what they want their children to see as far as cartoons go. There's no problem with this, by the way. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying they're hypocrites, and it's hilarious how obvious it is. You literally can't make it up. It is beyond parody.
I didn't have my sword, but I used my brain this time. And there are other kind of things that you can develop. And there are layers to that message that can resonate and be really positive. And He-Man is hilariously goofy.
Sure,
sure. But as a kid, I ate that up. He-Man was
but it's sincere.
Yes.
That's the difference, because I watch the cartoons that my kids have to watch now.
Are you actually going to try and argue that old, like, 80s cartoons are less sincere than modern cartoons? Sincerity is what you call wokeness, dude. When like, any modern cartoon is doing sincerity, it's what you guys call woke. Modern cartoons... Like, one of the things that's so fucking nice about the adult... So basically, for those that don't know, Adventure Time, one of the best kids animated shows ever, or all ages animated shows ever, recently had a reboot of sorts. It's a sequel, actually, a sequel show. It's an HBO Max or Max exclusive called Fiona and Cake. It's rated TV-14, and it's for adults. It's an adult animated show. They swear in it, there's blood and gore, it's great. But one of the nice things about it is that they don't overdo it. So much adult animated media is incapable of sincerity. Incapable of it. South Park. The Simpsons in the last 2 seasons has actually gotten really good. Unironically, I watched a video essay recently that was like, The Simpsons is good again, and I was like, no shot. Watched it, gave it a listen, heard it out, I was like, okay. Watched like a half dozen episodes from the 2 newest seasons on Disney+. Mind blown at how good they are. And they are not good because they're retreading old shit. It's nothing like old school Simpsons, but it's, I would argue, as good as old school Simpsons, but it's completely different. They're doing new shit, but it's still good. Like, it's quality. Like, the episodes focus on actually telling a story. Like, an actual story, which is nice, something The Simpsons hasn't been able to do for a while. They're character focused and character development focused. I'm going to spoil one episode, and I'm just going to let you guys know what this episode's about. Lisa ends up getting a bacterial infection and has to take a steroidal medicine in order to... Lisa and Bart do. They have to take steroidal medicines in order to get over this, or to get over the infection. The steroids have the side effect of making Lisa and Bart both gain a bunch of weight. So Bart and Lisa get pretty fat. Bart is able to pass this off as like bulk, like he got in fit and he ends up getting popular and he gets in with like the big, strong, older bullies at school and he's like working out with them during recess and stuff. Lisa, on her way out the door, Marge simply says, "Ooh, someone's getting chunky." And this sticks with Lisa the whole episode, and she just gets more and more self-conscious about it. And they visualize it as like the word in her mind growing every time Marge tries to make her feel better and reassure her, but just completely fails. And the whole episode is about the effect that a parent's words can have on their child. And at the end of the episode, Marge and Lisa, like, through means that are, you know, unimportant, are able to, like, Marge is able to see into Lisa's mind and see the effect of what her words had on Lisa. And then Lisa goes into Marge's mind and sees a memory Marge doesn't even remember because it's so internalized, where she was the same way. Marge was, when she was a little girl, wasn't focusing on her appearance or what boys thought of her or her, like, physical appearance or whatever, but her mom pushed the same type of shit on her without even realizing it. And Marge realizes there was this cyclical phenomenon of self-shame and body image destruction from mother to daughter that wasn't that the parent didn't even realize she was committing. Phenomenal episode. Not even the best episode of the two newest seasons. Insane how good new Simpsons is. I cannot believe how much they've turned it around. Seasons 33 and 34, I think they are. And then also the two-part episode, the two-parter, A Serious Flanders, phenomenal. Holy shit. It literally won Emmys. It's so fucking good. That aside, The Simpsons recently actually has been getting pretty sincere, so I'll give it that. But overall, adult animation is allergic to sincerity. I don't think that's a controversial take. Rick and Morty is another good example of a show overwhelmingly allergic to sincerity 99% of the time, to the point they make fun of sincerity most of the time. Less so recently with the new writers and the new people in charge, but still. Family Guy, obviously allergic to sincerity. American Dad, allergic to sincerity. Fiona and Cake, though, the spin-off show at Adventure Time, is just Adventure Time, but they're allowed to swear and show blood and tackle, you know, they're basically still tackling the same subject matter. It's just they're able to be more explicit about the adult themes, I guess. But it still feels like Adventure Time. It's just more free, right? And it brings that same sincerity Adventure Time brought to the table to that show, and it's been a breath of fresh air for adult animation, and it's why it blew up and became so viral. So many people got into Adventure Time because of Fiona and Cake, including my own mom, who I tried to get into Adventure Time my entire childhood, and now she's a fan because of Fiona and Cake. No. Modern day kids content, way more sincere than the old shit. I'm not saying the old shit wasn't sincere. It's just most of the more popular new stuff that I'm aware of, at least, beats out the old stuff that's popular that I'm aware of by a long shot. There was actually this like bizarre cynicality to a lot of old kids media that I appreciate, but it completely debunks the argument they're making here. Yeah, I used South Park as an example before, Murray Spare.
Now, because that's all that's on Netflix or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they are made by cynical millennials who are trying to introduce irony into them.
It's completely fine to start Adventure Time with Fiona and Cake, and it will make you want to watch Adventure Time. I genuinely think nowadays, and if you're an adult, the best way to get into Adventure Time is by starting with Fiona and Cake, particularly if you're an adult or like an older teenager. You'll be able to appreciate and get attached to the characters and universe in the adult animation format way easier. And then once you've become attached to them, watching the main show, you'll be able to witness the events that are like that are referenced, that sound really cool, and like they're like when they talk about the events of Adventure Time, they talk about it and make it sound cool as fuck. Like Fiona and Cake makes the Adventure Time show sound cool as shit. My mom wanted to immediately start watching the main show in between releases of Fiona and Cake episodes. Between the weeks. Like, it makes you want to watch the main show. So yeah, totally. Start with Fiona and Cake. Honestly, you can start with either episode 1 or 2. The way they made Fiona and Cake is so that you can start either episode 1 or 2 as your first episode. You can either start with episode 2, then watch episode 1 and then 3, or go 1, 2, 3. Personally, I recommend going 2, 1, 3. Start with episode 2, Simon Petrikov, is what I recommend. That's my favorite one of that batch, and you will immediately get hooked if you start with that one. Immediate hook right off the bat. It's the episode that takes place in the main Adventure Time universe too, so it's like a better intro to the world. I think episode 2 serves better as episode 1 personally, but they exist parallel to each other, and their endings exist at the same time. So, like, they all end at the start of episode 3. So it doesn't matter what order you watch them in. So yeah, watch them in order 2, 1, 3 is my recommendation. Cannot recommend Fiona and Cake enough. Literally my #1 show of the last, 5 years. Maybe 10.
It's like, no, look, an 8-year-old is not ironic. They don't understand irony. And actually, it's probably perverse to try and make them ironic. This is not good for them. Actually, a diet of sincerity is what is genuinely good for them.
What? Are these conservative pundits unironically arguing that irony is bad for kids when right-wing comedy relies entirely on pretending to be ironic? Look how hypocritical this all is in reference to, conservatives have completely different values when talking about adults than when talking about kids, funnily enough, right? Because they believe in freedom and whatnot for the adults who fall under the categories of identity they like. But when it comes to kids are supposed to be property that have to be groomed into becoming adults that will agree with them when they grow up. Kids love irony too. Kids can understand. Are they trying to argue that kids shouldn't be able to develop the ability to understand irony at a young age? They're not stupid. I mean, they are, but they're not that stupid.
You should be reinforcing sincere and decent messaging rather than making gross jokes that are aimed at adults and things like that. It's just not appropriate at all.
Is he talking about hidden references in Disney or Pixar movies? Is he unironically getting mad about shit well, Velma's an adult show. Is he unironically getting mad about shit like sex jokes that are hidden in Shrek? I rewatched Shrek recently, and the amount of adult jokes in that aren't even sexual inappropriate jokes. They're just jokes that require adult life experience to get. Otherwise, they're just gibberish to you, and you just hear adult words when you're a kid. I rewatched Shrek, the first one, recently. Oh my god, is it comedic genius when you watch it as an adult? The amount of adult humor in there. And a lot of, there's a fair amount of inappropriate adult humor, hidden in there. Kids don't get it, of course. But most of the adult humor is just, not even spicy. It's just, you gotta be an adult and have the experience that adults tend to have to get it. They aren't talking about anything. They just made up examples in their head. I'm sure that is the case.
Really despise it, actually. I've really, on a visceral level, I actually despise some of the things I catch my son watching. But they're just totally normal kids' cartoons for this era. I just can't take it, man.
Yeah,
I hope they give
the
examples.
people making the cartoons, they're aware that it does have influence.
Oh, yeah. That's why they do it. They're totally aware.
Well, they've said that. They admit that they've just been bold-faced.
Well, there's a big difference between some, the overwhelmingly progressive medium that is art, having people who push messages accept people as for who they are as a person, don't discriminate against them because they're race or because they're gay or because they're trans or whatever. That's very different from what these people are about to describe, which is going to be something about putting leftist propaganda, woke propaganda in the media. Kids media has always pushed what's supposed to be positive messages for kids to learn from. It's just that as society progresses, the floor of what is considered the minimum, the bare minimum of what expected to be believed to be a proper set of good values rises as society itself gets more progressive and we move further to the left and the Overton window moves further to the left. So that's why back in the 80s, you wouldn't see a pro-gay or pro-trans cartoon, but nowadays you will, because overwhelmingly society's become pro-gay and pro-trans.
And just admitted it.
Yeah. Because they're promoting social messages.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And okay, well, let's talk about social messages, because actually, if you go back and look at any example, there's no
Captain Planet. He-Man, which was gay as She-Ra. Feminist. What other examples of 80s cartoons can I think of? 80s kids cartoons that are pretty fucking woke. Sailor Moon. Transformers. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you got me there. Yeah, Rocko's Modern Life. Yeah, you're right. Rocko's Modern Life. That's a little bit. That's like late 90s, early 2000s. SpongeBob's too modern. We're talking 80s here. Come on, you heard my examples. Sailor Moon was 90s, but it's in that. Yeah. Thundercats. Yep. Furry couldn't get away with that today. Power Rangers, which, yeah. Any Sonic cartoon from the 80s. Star Trek. Yep. Oh my god, could you imagine if the concept of Star Trek became a thing today? Could you fucking imagine the idea of the space hippie shit that is Star Trek? If that became a thing today and the nerd sphere was like introduced to that for the first time today? Sonic did not exist in the 80s? Okay, well, listen. Reality didn't exist before I was born, alright? I have no memory of it unless it isn't real.
Question of who the hero and the villain is in the story, right? In every single one, in like Thundercats, Transformers, He-Man.
Holy shit, he's upset with the idea of media for kids being complicated enough that there's a question about who's the villain and who's the hero. They're just mad that kids media is getting like more interesting and complex. Oh my god.
You know, G.I. Joe, whatever it is, right? All the men take responsibility. Right? They are the ones taking responsibility. They are just...
They're literally mad that modern day cartoons don't push conservative values. Why aren't the men doing the things that society traditionally back in the day said men have to do? They got to be the ones who take the responsibility. Where's that it? Jihad Joe.
Stereotypically masculine. You know, they're heroic. They do the right thing in all circumstances, even when that's the difficult thing to do. And then finally, they solve their problems with violence. Which, and I know it's not a popular thing. It's not a popular thing, but I think that...
I love winter in this state because it means that the bugs want to get in, and I have to be on, like, Doom Guy mode 24/7 searching for creatures that have gotten into my open windows.
Really is the core of what being a man is. The last resort is always the fight, and that's the core of every superhero movie. It always comes to a physical confrontation in which the hero has to use his physical virtues to overcome the villain.
That speaks to something quite...
That's bad writing. That is literally bad writing. They call that in the anime world the anime protagonist screaming buff. When badly written animes simply make it so that, like, the protagonist just has to scream and try harder, and they'll unlock some latent power that allows them to overcome the adversity they couldn't before. And there's no character development. There's no actual journey they take that allows them to unlock that ability or overcome that trial. They just scream harder, and it gives them the anime protagonist buff. That's literally like a thing that's made fun of within the anime sphere because of like how bad the writing is when that's done. Good writing, for example, is when you take a hero, a protagonist, we'll say just a hero in this example, and early on in the story, they come up against the adversity, and they fail because they lack the skills, the knowledge, and the development to overcome that adversity. They go on a long journey where they develop, they learn, they train, whatever it may be, and they unlock what they need in order to overcome said adversity. And then they overcome said adversity. That is the traditional hero's journey. However, here's the thing, what they're actually complaining about here is postmodernism. Let's take an example of a show that breaks this mold. But a lot of conservatives, recognizing how good it is, just can't really get their mind around the fact that it breaks that mold. So they try to like cram it into it despite that. And it looks really embarrassing when they do. Breaking Bad. Spoiler alert here, but Walter White, Heisenberg, the main character of Breaking Bad, is the bad guy. Okay? And conservatives famously despise Walter White's wife, who acts as like unironically the voice of reason, who's like, you are putting our family in danger to commit a felony. You're going to go to prison and ruin our lives. Why didn't you accept money from your friend who's a millionaire who's willing to pay for your treatment and keep us like sheltered and housed for life, and it's because of his like pride, and he admits it at the end. Anyway, because of that, the right can't recognize this. Like, they literally cannot recognize this. And so they despise Skylar and see her as a antagonist in the show, because naturally, no matter what, because Walt's the main character, he must be the hero. He must be the good guy. And of course, I'm sure their biases against women are a big part of it too, you know. And so just today, I saw something related to this. Orwell and Good is like a far-right alt-writer who runs like a Nazi website, like a Nazi news outlet, but also runs a Twitter meme account called Orwell and Good. I forget the guy's real name, but he's been doxxed recently, and he runs like a white nationalist board. But he tweeted out this meme that is literally someone else's tweet, who's also like a chud shitlord, saying, "Wah, my husband cooks meth. Wah, my husband wants to leave us money. Wah, my husband killed a guy who is going to kill all of us." And then a picture of Skylar crying. And I quote tweeted it saying, "These people saw Walt almost rape Skylar in their kitchen when their son was about to get home, and were like, yeah, these awful bitch wives, am I right?" Yeah, Fact Fiend is really good at pointing out this tendency. The reality is, Breaking Bad is a perfect example of masterful postmodern media. It fundamentally challenges the idea of the protagonist of said media being the good guy. And there is no hero's journey. There is no traditional old school storytelling method. And in the end, well, I won't say how it ends. Let's just say it doesn't end the traditional way. Not saying it wasn't done before, by like even Shakespeare didn't have endings that were similar, but you know, it's considered postmodernist media. Something that conservatives, such as Soygon and Shadiversity, rail against, and is literally what they're railing against right now. The idea of media evolving past what they consider to be like the traditional way of doing things. Which episode was that? I remember him almost killing her, but rape, what? Remember the scene in the kitchen where she's wearing the green facial mask? Man, you guys, I understand, because it's literally impossible to root for Walt in any way, shape, or form with that in your mind. But yeah, there was a whole scene where Walt, like, bent her over in the kitchen, and she's yelling, "Stop," and he's unbuckling his pants, and he's, like, about to rape her, and, like, eventually it gets, like, she's fighting back enough that he stops. That is how the bad guy Walt is. And people saw that, and were like, "Oh, Skylar, she's awful for being cringy, singing Happy Birthday in that one scene and cheating on him." And they always love to use the example of, well, she stole his money and gave it to Ted. The money she stole from Walt wasn't given to Ted. It was given to Ted and immediately forced by muscle to be given by Ted to the IRS to pay his, like, unpaid taxes, because he had been doing tax fraud that would then lead back to her and Walt and get Walt in trouble. When Skylar gave Ted the money, it was to save Walt from getting caught, because those eyes on them would have inevitably led to them getting caught. She saved their asses by doing that. And yet they still use that as an example of her f***ing him over and being the villain. That is how incapable of media analysis and media literacy conservatives are. You need to understand, if these people, like, were in charge of what media was allowed to exist and be popular, we would be in hell.
I think deeper in the subconscious. I think people understand this on a subconscious level, because it plays out in so many levels, where if there's any conflict, and when every other option to resolve the conflict fails, the last resort that it always falls to is violence. Like, if it's a conflict that must be,
it's the final arbitration.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
By the way, chat, Zan's not even arguing fan theories. This is just true. No, I'm literally quoting, like, I'm literally referencing scenes in the show. Like, I'm not making anything up. Oh, and also, if you want an idea of how f***ing woke Breaking Bad is, there's a detail in one episode of Breaking Bad that I never noticed. I've never seen pointed out by a soul on the entire internet, Not a single person I've ever seen point out. My mom, of all people, noticed it on on her first watch through of Breaking Bad when I had her watch it. Who remembers the scene where Walt goes to the department store to buy a new hot water heater, finally? Because of the running joke of them having a shit hot water heater, so he buys a new one. And he talks to the store clerk about the different hot water heaters. If you pay attention to that scene, you can watch as Walt pays attention to the body movements and poses that the guy is taking. He's like this macho man, kind of handyman, fix-it guy. And Walt actively starts copying him. Like monkey see, monkey do. It was actively, like purposefully, by the actors. He starts copying every motion the guy does because he, like, the putting the hands on the hips, he does it right after the other guy does, and, like, looking at him and does it. Like, he immediately does it. When the guy crosses his arms, Walt, like, immediately, like he's trying to copy him, right? The reason for that is very obviously because Walt is very insecure in his masculinity. Extraordinarily insecure in his masculinity. And so when he sees someone that, in his mind, fits that, like, stereotype of a masculine, strong man, he imitates it to a hilarious degree. I'd never seen anyone point that out before. I pointed it out on stream a while ago. My chat didn't believe me, so I found the scene on YouTube and then told people like what episode it was. They found the scene and watched it and were commenting, "Holy shit, Zan is right. He's completely right. How did I never notice that?" Ridiculous how obvious if you actually pay attention. Even beyond examples like that, which are actually fairly hard to notice if you're not like looking for it. That like the show is a arguably progressive feminist critique of toxic masculinity, the pride of men who hold themselves to the expectations that they believe society expects them to hold. Like, nobody was actually expecting Walt to figure out and solve all the problems that he was facing financially on his own. No one in his life. None of them. Elliot wasn't expecting to. They offered him money to help him. And of course, Hank did too. None of them thought less of him for needing help. He was the one who insisted his pride would be bruised if he didn't do it all himself and become a meth kingpin. Anyway, we got a little off topic, but really what they're complaining about here is postmodernism, and it's embarrassing. It really is. Zan, are you insecure in your masculinity? Not really, but I mean, I guess every guy is to an extent, right? You're kind of lying if you say you're not. But for the most part, I don't really think about it much. Like, my masculinity and my being a guy or a man really only comes up when it's, like, relevant. Like, it's just not really something you think about, right? Anyway, that's all I have to say on this.